My name is Daniel, and if someone tells you that beaches are peaceful, they've probably never stayed long enough to watch the sunrise, because that's when I learned the ocean wasn't giving something back, it was leaving something behind. I still don't know who those footprints belong to. I only know they weren't there the night before, and every morning there were more. If you've ever visited a quiet beach town during the off-season, you know how different it feels. The tourists disappear, the restaurants close early, the streets become silent, even the ocean seems louder. This story was sent to me by one of our subscribers. I've changed the names and the exact location at their request, after reading everything they included, the photographs, the newspaper clippings, and the old journal entries. I couldn't stop thinking about one question: why did every person in that town refuse to look toward the beach at sunrise? This is Tales of the Dark. 3 years ago, I left my job as a travel photographer, not because I wanted to, because I had burned out. For almost 8 years, I'd spent more time in airports than in my own apartment. Every destination eventually looked the same. So I rented a small beach cottage in a coastal town called Blackwater Cove. It wasn't famous. You wouldn't find it on travel brochures. Only about 600 people lived there year-round. Most of the houses overlooked the ocean. The town had one grocery store, one gas station, one diner, and a weathered wooden pier that looked like it hadn't been repaired in decades. It was exactly the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened, or so I thought. The owner of the cottage was an elderly woman named Margaret. She greeted me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. As she handed me the keys, she looked toward the beach. "You like taking sunrise photographs?" I nodded. "It's why I came." She hesitated, then quietly said, "Sleep in." I laughed. "I'd rather not." She looked back at me. It wasn't a suggestion. Before I could ask what she meant, she climbed into her truck and drove away. And the first afternoon was perfect. Cool sea breeze, grey clouds drifting over the water, fishing boats returning before sunset. I walked nearly 5 miles along the shoreline taking photographs. The beach was almost empty, just a few fishermen packing their nets, 2 children collecting shells, a lifeguard locking his tower before leaving. Nothing unusual. Around sunset, I noticed something strange. Everyone left at almost the exact same time, not gradually, all at once, within 5 minutes. The entire beach was empty, even the fishermen hurried away. I assumed the tide was coming in, so I stayed. The waves rolled peacefully onto the shore. Nothing happened. 30 minutes later, I finally walked back to the cottage. As I reached the road, I noticed an old fisherman sitting alone on an overturned boat. He had been repairing fishing nets earlier that day. Now he simply watched the horizon. Without looking at me, he asked, "First night?" "Yeah," he nodded slowly. "You'll hear the tide around 4. I've heard tides before. This one isn't water." I smiled politely. He didn't. That night, heavy clouds covered the moon. Around midnight, rain began falling. I spent hours organizing my camera equipment before finally going to bed. At exactly 4:52 a.m., I woke to absolute silence, not because of a loud noise, because every sound had stopped. No wind, no rain, no waves. The silence itself woke me. I checked my phone. No signal. Strange. The cottage Wi-Fi had also disconnected. I looked through the bedroom window. The ocean looked darker than the sky. Then the sound returned, not crashing waves, thousands of soft footsteps, almost too quiet to notice, like people walking barefoot across wet sand. Hundreds of them, maybe more, moving together toward the town. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the front door. The sound stopped instantly. Outside, nothing moved. The beach was empty. I convinced myself it had been the wind. By sunrise, everything felt normal again. I took my camera and walked toward the shore. Halfway there, I stopped. The sand was covered, not with dozens of footprints, thousands, every size imaginable. Small children, teenagers, adults, bare feet, all perfectly clear, all leading out of the ocean, none leading back. I stared at them for nearly a minute. The waves reached the first row of prints, but they didn't disappear. The The water flowed around them, leaving every footprint untouched. I crouched down, pressed my hand into one. The sand was damp, fresh, less than an hour old. A jogger approached from the road without slowing down. He crossed the beach while carefully avoiding every footprint, as though he'd done it 100 times. "You seeing this?" I asked. He kept jogging. "Go home before tomorrow," that was all he said. The local diner opened at 7. I showed one of my photos to the waitress. She didn't even look. Instead, she quietly turned the picture face down. "You shouldn't photograph those." "Why?" She forced a smile. "Because people who keep photographing them, they stop asking questions." I laughed awkwardly. "What does that even mean?" She never answered. Instead, she walked into the kitchen. An older man sitting at the counter spoke without turning around. "You're renting Margaret's cottage." It wasn't a question. "Yeah." He stirred his coffee. "She should have warned you better." "Warn me about what?" He finally looked up. "The counting." That afternoon, I visited the small public library. There wasn't much there, mostly local history, fishing records, storm reports, tourist brochures from the 1980s. While flipping through old newspaper archives, I found a headline from nearly 40 years earlier. "Mysterious footprints return after storm." The article ended abruptly. No explanation, no follow-up. I searched again. Another article 10 years later. Different reporter, same footprints, same beach, same unanswered questions. Then, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Every article had been published on the same date. October 18, exactly today's date, was October 18. That evening, I returned to the beach before sunset. This time, I watched everyone leave. Again, within minutes, the shoreline became completely empty. As I turned to walk back, the old fisherman called my name. I never remembered telling him what it was. He motioned for me to come closer, then handed me a worn leather notebook. "I've been waiting 23 years to give this to someone." I opened it. The first page contained only one sentence. "Count them every morning. The day one extra set appears, leave immediately." I looked up. The fisherman was staring toward the ocean, without blinking, without moving, almost whispering to himself. "They're early this year." I followed his gaze far beyond the waves. Something dark was standing in the water, too far away to identify, completely motionless, watching the shore. And as the last light of the sun disappeared, it took one slow step toward the beach. The figure didn't move again, not while I stood there, not while the last light disappeared behind the horizon. The old fisherman quietly took my arm. "We're leaving." I looked back toward the water. "It's probably someone fishing." "No, it isn't." His voice wasn't frightened. It sounded tired, like a man repeating the same warning for the 100th time. We walked away from the beach without another word. I kept looking over my shoulder. The figure never moved, yet, no matter how far we walked, it never seemed farther away. It was as if the distance between us never changed. That night, I couldn't sleep. The notebook lay open on the kitchen table. Every page contained dates. Each page listed only one number. October 18, 1987, 4932, October 18, 1988, 5071, October 18, 1989, 5214. Every single year, the number increased. No explanation, just numbers near the end of the notebook. The handwriting became shaky. The final completed page read, October 18, 2022, 9874. Underneath it, one sentence: "They're getting closer." I checked the calendar. It was now October 18, 2025. The last 3 years were blank. I made a decision at sunrise. I'd count them myself, not because I believed the notebook, because I wanted to prove it was nonsense. I barely slept. At 4:45 a.m., the same silence woke me again. No wind, no waves, no insects then. The footsteps, thousands of them, soft, slow, coming from the shoreline. I grabbed my camera. This time, I didn't open the front door. Instead, I watched from the upstairs window. The beach was hidden by darkness, but something was moving, not one figure, hundreds. I couldn't make out shapes, only motion, as if a crowd was slowly walking across wet sand. Then, at exactly 5:03 a.m., everything stopped. The ocean roared back to life. Birds began singing. The wind returned. It was over by sunrise. I hurried to the beach. My stomach tightened. There were more, far more than yesterday. The notebook contained a hand-drawn grid used for counting. I spent nearly 2 hours marking every trail when I finished. The total was 10,143. I checked it again, same number. Then I compared it to yesterday's estimate from the fisherman. It had increased by exactly one, not one footprint, one complete trail someone new had walked out of the ocean. The old fisherman was waiting on the pier before I spoke. He asked, "How many?" I told him. He closed his eyes. "So, it finally happened." "What happened?" He looked toward the empty beach. "For 23 years, the number always matched. This morning, someone extra arrived." "What does that mean?" "It means they're no longer replacing people. They're adding to them." I thought he had lost his mind until I visited the town records office. I asked to see old census documents. The clerk reluctantly agreed. The population of Blackwater Cove in 1987, 612, 1988, still 612, 1989, still 612 every single year. Exactly the same, not approximately, exactly. No births recorded, no deaths recorded, no one moving in. No one moving away. For almost 40 years, that wasn't possible. Then I noticed something else. Several names disappeared from one year's record, only to reappear the following year. Different handwriting, different signatures, same people, as if someone had quietly rewritten history. That afternoon, I started asking questions. Nobody answered. People smiled politely, changed the subject, walked away. One elderly woman finally whispered, "We don't count people anymore. We count mornings." Before I could stop her, she hurried inside and locked her door. That evening, I drove toward the highway. I wasn't waiting another sunrise. I packed my cameras, loaded the car, left the cottage behind. 10 miles later, the road curved around the cliffs. I should have reached the highway. Instead, the welcome sign appeared again. "Welcome to Blackwater Cove." I frowned. Maybe I'd taken the wrong turn. I tried again, same result. Again, same sign, 4 attempts, always back at the same entrance. As the sun began setting, I realized something terrifying. The gas gauge hadn't moved, neither had the trip odometer. It was as if I had never left. I returned to the cottage. Margaret was sitting on the porch as though she'd been expecting me. "You tried to leave, you knew," she nodded. "I tried once. So did my husband. So did everyone. Why didn't anyone tell me?" She looked toward the ocean. "Because newcomers never believe us." I asked the question that had haunted me since arriving. "What are the footprints?" For a long time, she said nothing. Finally, she answered, "They belong to everyone. Whoever escaped." I stared at her. "I don't understand." "Neither do we. They leave, but every year, they come back, just not alive." That night, nobody in town turned on their lights. Every house was dark, every curtain closed. At exactly 4:52 a.m., the silence returned. This time, I walked outside. The street was empty. Every front door remained shut. The footsteps grew louder, closer, closer. Then they stopped. I looked toward the beach. The first light of dawn revealed thousands of footprints, fresh, perfect, leading inland. For the first time, I noticed something I had somehow missed before. Every trail ended at a house. One trail, one house, every single home in town, including mine. The final trail stopped directly in front of Margaret's cottage, where I was staying. My pulse raced. There hadn't been a trail there yesterday. I slowly followed it backward, across the sand, toward the sea, halfway to the water. I found something buried beneath the surface. A camera covered in wet sand. It looked familiar. I picked it up. My own camera, the one hanging around my neck. I looked down. The strap around my neck was gone. I was holding it, without remembering dropping it. Hands trembling, I turned it on. The battery still worked. There was only one photograph, taken at sunrise today. The picture showed the beach, thousands of footprints, and one man standing at the edge of the water, holding a camera, wearing my jacket, my backpack, my watch, my face. He wasn't looking at the ocean. He was looking directly at me. I slowly lowered the camera. The beach in front of me was empty. Then I heard footsteps, not thousands, just one pair. Behind me, I turned, no one. I looked back toward the ocean. There was now one more trail, fresh, perfect, leading out of the sea, stopping exactly where I was standing. I never saw who made it. The police report later stated that I checked out of Margaret's cottage that morning. My car was found parked beside the highway. The keys were still inside, my wallet, my passport, everything except me. Margaret told investigators I had left before sunrise. No one questioned her. They never found my camera or the notebook. 3 months later, a tourist visiting Blackwater Cove uploaded sunrise photographs online. Most people noticed the footprints. Only one person noticed something else. Far in the background, standing motionless beside the shoreline, was a man holding a camera, looking toward the town. The comments assumed it was another tourist. But one retired police officer recognized him immediately. It was me. The photograph had been taken 87 days after I disappeared. That was the end of this story. If you've ever experienced something you still can't explain, or have a strange story of your own, send it to Tales of the Dark. Your story could become the next nightmare featured on this channel. And if you're new here, subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. Until next time, stay away from places that leave more footprints than they erase.